It seemed at the time impossible.
Has the most famous ship in the history of the world been discovered at last?
The Gilgamesh epic paralleled exactly the story of Noah in the Bible.
There is plenty of ancient historical evidence spanning nearly 2,000 years that the Ark is on Mount Ararat.
The location of the mystical Mount Sinai itself is the subject of relentless argument.
The biblical story of the burning bush is completely true and totally provable.
It must have seemed to Moses that God was asking him to do the impossible.
In the book of Matthew, we're told that the graves were opened and the bodies of many dead saints were raised to life.
During the night, all of Sennacherib's army had been struck down by some kind of plague.
Mary Magdalene was a woman of independent means and spirit.
For nearly 2,000 years, she's inspired millions of people, especially women.
The Grail is believed by many to be the cup containing the wine that Christ associated with his blood at the Last Supper. According to the legend, only Sir Galahad was able to reach it, dying in a moment of transcendental glory. The sound of pottery shattering caught his attention. The curiosity of the world was ignited.
The Dead Sea Scrolls date back almost 2,000 years.
Along with the many papyrus and leather scrolls was a scroll made of copper. As Herod's men attempted to open the tomb, a blast of flame filled the chamber and drove them back.
God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place.
And the stars of heaven fell unto earth.
Fires are burning all over the city, and several plane crashes with countless calls to lives. Complete chaos is the only way I can describe the situation.
For the great day of his wrath is come.
It turns out that Bible prophecy has an unparalleled record of accuracy.
The focus of the conflict lies in the destiny of Jerusalem.
This will be the last great battle, and one in which God himself will eventually take part.
You'll be amazed at what has been discovered.
We are about to embark on a journey that will help us unravel the many unexplained mysteries still surrounding the ancient story of Noah and the great flood that covered the earth. What new findings have modern technology, from satellite photography to the laboratory, provided the serious investigator? Do we know how Noah built his great boat? And who are the people who say they have actually seen the Ark of Noah? Noah's Ark is probably the best known and most thoroughly debated religious artifact in the world. Ark researchers and scholars have raised any number of serious and controversial questions about the entire episode.
Could thousands of animals actually have been taken aboard an immense boat in order to survive a devastating flood? How can one boat, even an immense one, have sheltered all the species of animals known to us in the world today? How could 8 people have cared for and fed all those animals at sea during that entire year?
Why do we get some reports that people have claimed to have seen the Ark on Mount Ararat, yet dozens of well-financed expeditions have gone up there looking for it and have come back empty-handed? It's either up there or it's not.
Most efforts to understand the flood are flawed because investigators choose to accept some parts of the biblical account but ignore others, and because only some scientific evidence is considered. Meteorites are now being analyzed that suggest they did not originate in the void of outer space, but actually here on Earth, launched by the fountains of the great deep as the global flood began.
But if scientists are just now discovering new proof of the old traditions, Doesn't that make it even more important that we confirm the many sightings of the Ark on Mount Ararat? Scholars have generally found it easy to wave off the ancient accounts with little more than a shrug. But the first modern discovery of evidence that the great boat might actually exist created such excitement that a virtual parade of explorers descended upon Mount Ararat. In the mid-1950s, the mountain finally gave up its first physical clues of the 20th century. It was to be the beginning of a series of modern-day efforts to pinpoint the secret whereabouts of Noah's Ark. A French demolition engineer named Fernand Navarre became interested in the Ark while serving in the military. Navarre began the first of a series of expeditions to Mount Ararat in 1952.
My Kurdish guides had abandoned me at the lower level of the mountain, and so I tried my best to proceed on my own. I was not able to find the Ark exposed, but I did see a massive dark shape frozen under the glacier ice. I knew then I would have to return to discover what it could be.
He returned in July of '55, accompanied by his young son, Raphael. What we see here is actual footage filmed by Fernand Navarre and his son during their expedition.
1955 was a warm year with a great glacial meltback. I know if I had a chance to reach the Ark, it would be now.
It was Raphael who first spotted something. Navarre carefully lowered himself deep into a crevice at the 13,500 foot level.
The wood was easy to see, but was frozen into the ice. Still then, I had no idea how big it was.
What Navarre chopped from the ice was a 5-foot, hand-hewn wooden beam.
I had dreamed of this. Raphael and I were excited like it was Christmas time.
A proud moment and fulfillment of a long-held wish. But was this actually wood from Noah's Ark? It was determined that the type of wood Navarre found does not grow near Mount Ararat. As a matter of fact, there's not a forest within 300 miles of the mountain. Navarre had the wood tested in 3 different laboratories. He was told its age was around 5,000 years, clearly in line with the biblical account of the flood. The scientific test proved beyond question that something very old, something very mysterious, was definitely on Mount Ararat. Much of what we commonly know about the story of Noah is found here in the book of Genesis in the Bible.
Our investigation of the mystery surrounding Noah's Ark shall begin with a simple question. Why would God destroy the world and nearly every person and every animal in it? The answer, according to the Bible, is that God saw great wickedness within his earthly creation. The Bible says God decided to destroy the living things of the world because man was living in corruption. Well, certainly violence has always been a part of man's ways. Both ancient Greek and Hebrew writings indicate there was a great deal of corruption and brutality among the people of earth. There were many murders, human life was cheap indeed.
Noah and his family, which consisted of his wife, 3 sons, and their wives, was a righteous family in a world filled with wickedness. The Bible tells us God spoke directly to Noah and told him he was about to destroy every living thing off the face of the earth. Only Noah, his family, and the birds and animals are to be spared.
God told Noah to make the ark with lower, middle, and upper decks. The construction of the ark continued over many years. Noah's neighbors came to laugh and scorn as Noah and his family worked toward completion. The construction by hand of a floating vessel of these huge dimensions boggles the mind. How was it possible for Noah to have built the ark on such a grand scale as recorded in the Bible without the use of modern technology?
If we look at the evidence left to us by ancient civilizations, we find that the further back we go, the more amazing are the accomplishments. The ancient Minoans were highly advanced. Some of the reconstructions of their temples that were destroyed catastrophically reveal that they had tremendous abilities, architectural skills and artistic design. We see their inlaid stone, natural ventilation, and air conditioning. We could go to Egypt and look at some of their artifacts, some of which are electroplated. Such electroplated artifacts have been found literally around the ancient world. The ancients were also able to make batteries and generate electricity. The ancient Mayans were able to calculate the solar year to be 365.2420 days, accurate to within 2/10,000ths of a day. Or we could look at this lady buried over 2,100 years ago in China, and today her body is perfectly preserved so that it can be examined by an X-ray technician.
From this information, we can easily draw the conclusion that, in fact, ancient man had highly developed technology, easily sufficient to build a vessel the size of Noah's Ark. But when scientists have gone digging for facts about the Great Flood, some surprising things turn up.
In all the cultures I've studied, the story of Noah and the flood are practically identical in all different sorts of ancient languages, whether it's Persian, Babylonian, ancient Egyptian, Chinese, Sanskrit. The only thing that changes occasionally is the name of Noah. Not only does it appear in the Christian Bible, but also in the Quran, the Bible of Islam. There it tells the story of Noah, or Nuh in Arabic, who escapes the flood in an ark with his family.
These accounts certainly help support the Noah story, but is there any archaeological evidence to back up the stories?
The flood account is found on Babylonian, Akkadian, and Sumerian cuneiform tablets, which are now found in the British Museum. These date back to about 700 BC, but there are older accounts of the flood found in individual Chinese characters. Now, these Chinese characters really date back a long time. And we find the most ancient forms of Chinese character in bronzeware vessels. These are ceremonial vessels, and the writing is found inscribed inside of the vessels.
Contrary to the critics, there does seem to be historical evidence of both Noah and the flood. 272 mentions, to be exact, in every civilization and culture around the world, including the Aztec and Inca cultures. Are there artifacts dating back to antiquity that have been found on Mount Ararat? How does local legend explain these surprising items? Could these be artifacts from Noah's Ark itself? The search for Noah's Ark for at least the past half-century has centered on this volcanic peak, which borders on Iran and the former Soviet Empire. Mount Ararat rises to nearly 17,000 feet and covers 24 square miles. It is not only imposing, it is dangerous as well.
I've climbed mountains all over the world, but Mount Ararat is, I guess, it's brutal. It's just the worst I've ever climbed. Actually, from the south side, when you look at the mountain, it looks like a nice volcanic cone, but then on the opposite side, there's this incredible canyon called the Ohora Gorge. It's about 1.5 times the height of the Grand Canyon. There are vertical rock walls. I'm convinced they're unclimbable. On top of that, it's covered with an ice cap year-round, and that ice cap is always eroding these volcanic layers and always produces in avalanches. Every afternoon there's a storm up on the mountain, and the winds sometimes are over 100 miles an hour.
But neither the ominous legends nor the lethal hazards of the climb have ever deterred the thousands of determined seekers of the Ark.
We know that the Chaldean high priest and historian Berosus visited the site about 475 BC, where he wrote considerably of the phenomena he witnessed, stating that it was quite easy to discern the Ark in its resting place high up on the glacier.
Many celebrated men of antiquity made journeys to the awesome mountain. One of these was Iphanaeus, Bishop of Salamis in 360 AD. He was shown an already treasured relic of the Ark, a well-preserved, identifiable piece of a seagoing vessel. The Armenian historian Hippa wrote that he himself saw the ark in 1254. He wrote, "At the summit of Mount Ararat, a great black object is visible, the Ark of Noah." In 1269 AD, renowned explorer Marco Polo wrote in his book, The Travels, that Noah's Ark rests high in the snowy reaches of Mount Ararat.
There is plenty of ancient historical evidence spanning nearly 2,000 years that the Ark is on Mount Ararat. These sightings, recorded by prominent historians of the time, along with eyewitness accounts, add significant credibility to the survival of the Ark on Mount Ararat.
By the mid-19th century, global communication helped to bring more information to Western civilization, along with, of course, more speculation and rumors of reported sightings. In 1829, a Russian-born German physician named Friedrich Parrot became the first Western explorer on record to scale Mount Ararat. Prior to the climb, Parrot visited a cathedral in Soviet Armenia. There he was shown a cross, which it was claimed was carved from wood brought down from Noah's Ark in 318 AD. Parrot wrote that the carving measured 12 inches high and 9 inches across and was brownish in color. From there, Parrot climbed to the 7,000-foot level to the village of Ahora. This is where the St. Jacob Monastery was located. There he saw ancient manuscripts and relics from the Ark. Parrot continued on to the summit of Mount Ararat, but he had no success in locating the Ark. In June of 1840, 11 years after Parrot's expedition, a tremendous earthquake struck Mount Ararat. The monastery and most of the 2,000 homes and villages in the area were destroyed. Survivors were few. The monastery and the relics it held literally disappeared under tons of ice and rock from the shattered mountain. What remained was a huge gash in the mountain, deeper than the Grand Canyon, now known as the Ahora Gorge. Throughout the 1800s, explorers and adventurers mounted expeditions to seek out the Ark. Truman von Ottisch and an Englishman, Major Robert Pruitt, climbed to the Ararat summit in 1845. Colonel Kotskill of the Russian Army conquered the peak in 1850. There are those critics who have difficulty believing the accounts of past explorers, principally it seems, because the stories are old. And in all fairness, we should ask, is there any reason to believe the record of their explorations?
I have studied virtually every known historical sighting of the Ark on Mount Ararat. In the last 150 years, some of them have gone into considerable detail. I've compared about 32 of these sightings, and I found that there's a tremendous consistency. We can choose to believe that all of these reports are based upon lies, or we can choose to believe that the Ark or some large wooden barge is on Mount Ararat.
But whether Noah's Ark is actually on Mount Ararat is only one of the points of controversy. With the completion of the great boat, God instructed Noah to bring onto the Ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female. But wouldn't the gathering of the animals have been a virtually impossible task?
The Bible says the animals shall come to the Ark. In this case, we wonder how the animals knew to come to this location. We think that instinctively they sensed from what was going on around about them that this impending disaster was about to happen. And as a result, they were led or even driven to seek a place of safety. Hence, the animals came to the Ark.
The enormous size of Noah's Ark notwithstanding, many serious questions arise that clearly challenge the credibility of the entire Ark story.
The question I would ask is quite simple. How could 2 of every living animal be brought aboard any vessel? The sheer numbers and weight would overwhelm a fleet of arks. I don't believe we can take the story of the Ark literally.
Actually, the biblical record does not say that every species of animal in the world was in the Ark. Many kinds were in the ocean, whales and marine creatures of various types, and of course, The major insect varieties in the world were not included either. From studies that I and others have done, we estimate there could have been from 2,500 to 20,000 different kinds of animals taken aboard Noah's Ark.
Each family of creatures on the earth today has a single pair of ancestors. For example, even though there are over 300 varieties of dogs in the world today due to selective breeding, they have a single common ancestor. Considering the number of kinds of animals required to be put aboard the Ark, there would have been ample room to load the ancestors of all the species we know today, with room left over for Noah's family, food, and supplies.
In spite of all the ancient accounts and reported sightings, many people over the years have regarded the Ark story as nothing more than an old legend. Part of the problem was that there was only one widely known source, the Holy Bible. But the credibility of the biblical story of Noah got a big boost from an unlikely source, and in a most accidental fashion, from this man. In the mid-1800s, George Smith, an engraver by trade, liked to spend his lunch hours in the British Museum.
I was not a trained archaeologist, but I had an endless fascination for things of an historical nature. My special interest was with artifacts of ancient Assyria. Though I'd never been to that part of the world, I'd read extensively everything available on Middle Eastern cultures and was utterly captivated by the subject.
A frequent visitor, Smith had struck up a friendship with the museum director, who was impressed by the man's intelligence and enthusiasm. Smith was offered a special job. Someone was needed to piece together some of the 25,000 clay cuneiform tablets unearthed at the city of Nineveh and dating back to the 6th century BC.
The next 10 years of my life were spent putting together these ancient clay tablets, but it was more than a complicated jigsaw puzzle. The inscriptions I translated from those tablets had a profound effect on the world of archaeology.
In 1872, after a decade of work, Smith came upon an account of a ship surviving a great flood and its coming to rest on a mountain, a dove being sent out and not finding a place to land. The story told on these tablets, known as the Gilgamesh epic, paralleled exactly the story of Noah in the Bible, suggesting the biblical account is far more than a fictional legend. Smith's startling findings stirred great scientific curiosity and rekindled enormous public interest about the Ark and its possible discovery. And with that renewed interest came another flood, a flood of questions. What about the Ark itself? Was it capable of carrying out its assigned life-saving task? Could a seagoing vessel built to the Ark's specifications endure a 40-day-long cloudburst and survive in a violent storm-tossed sea? Would the Ark be sound and stable in the water? It is admittedly difficult to imagine a huge 3-story wooden barge-like craft surviving at least 40 days and nights of storm-racked seas, especially a craft that had never been close to water before the fateful deluge.
When it comes to the design and construction of the biblical Ark, there are several important reasons it could not have existed. First, the technology needed simply did not exist. Second, any modern vessel today would have certainly foundered in far less weather conditions than the biblical deluge. It is highly unlikely Noah's wooden ark would have survived more than a few hours under such conditions.
To examine this issue ourselves, we took a model of the Ark to a marine laboratory to see how it would handle waves and other hydraulic stresses. When subjected to the waves generally found on the ocean, the Ark was deemed not only seaworthy, but exceptionally stable. Then the test tank duplicated waves equivalent to 200-foot tidal waves. Again, the Ark was not only seaworthy, but extraordinarily safe.
The balance between the buoyant force and the gravitational force and the wave force and so on would be such that the Ark would right itself if it were tilted anywhere up to 90 degrees, anywhere from 0 to 90 degrees, in other words. The righting effect would be such that it would just come right back up again. It'd be practically impossible to capsize.
The Ark, it seems, had some remarkably seaworthy characteristics. It was remarkable for another reason as well. No larger ship was built for over 4,000 years.
It was 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Its roof could hold 20 volleyball courts. It had 1,500,000 cubic feet of space inside, which is the equivalent of 170 railroad boxcars. The Ark should be thought of in this perspective. Think of a 4-story apartment building almost a block long, and you've got it.
But aside from the measurements given in the Bible, how do we know what the Ark really looked like? In 1902, George Agopian, an 8-year-old Armenian boy, became the youngest Ark eyewitness on record. This was a summer of particularly warm weather, leaving the Ark both visible and easily accessible to the young boy and his uncle.
It was huge to see, larger even than any building I had ever seen. My uncle was going to lift me on top, but we had to pile up rocks in order to reach it.
Young George was boosted up and was able to reach the roof of the vessel.
Members of my family had told us stories about coming to the Ark, and now here I was, actually standing on it. Nearby, I could see a hole had been cut in the roof, so I went to it and looked inside. It was just too dark in there to see anything at all. There were pieces broken off here and there, but it was still very solid to walk on. Along the side of the raised section in the middle, there were openings like windows, but there was nothing I could see.
Years after the event, Agopian described what he had seen to archaeological illustrator Alfred Lee.
Up here, George Agopian, after a 4-year drought, went up with his uncle and saw the Ark completely exposed. He also noticed along the side here the wood grain, beautifully fitted joints with wooden dowels. He could see the color of the grain. It was not a stone formation. It was definitely a man-made wooden construction.
All these pieces of beams and wooden planking brought down from Mount Ararat over the centuries present us with yet another question. Given its great age and being subject to the whims of nature, what condition would the Ark be in today?
There's been a tremendous earthquake. As you know, this is an earthquake region. And there's been a great crevasse created here, and a big avalanche, and the Ark has split into 2 pieces. And this is what is being seen today.
This points up another mystery. How can the Ark, so easily found by some, simply disappear when others go looking for it?
This photograph, which was taken by the French Spot satellite in August 1986, indicates that Mount Ararat, pictured here, is permanently year-round covered with glacial ice. On Mount Ararat, there are of course seasonal changes in the weather. The chances of seeing the Ark are greatly increased during the warm months of late summer, such as in August or September. However, there are warmer weather cycles occurring every few years which cause increased meltback of the snow-covered summit. It's possible and probably likely that the Ark is only visible or accessible during these infrequent periods of warmer temperatures. An expedition coming to find the Ark could walk directly over the icebound ship and never know that it's there.
The Bible has given us the Ark's dimensions, eyewitness descriptions tell us what it looks like, and modern hydrologists tell us it was completely seaworthy, indeed virtually unsinkable. So, assuming for the moment the Ark is there under the ice, let's turn to the idea of the flood itself. What, if anything, does modern science tell us such a catastrophe might have done or would have done to the planet Earth once the rain stopped falling?
Do you see?
At long last.
So assuming for the moment that the Ark is there under the ice, let's turn to the idea of the flood itself. What, if anything, does modern science tell us such a catastrophe might have done or would have done to the planet Earth once the rain stopped falling? Does the flood account for fossils of sea creatures high up on the slopes of great mountain ranges? Was the flood the beginning or the end of continental drift? Does it explain the enormous mountain ranges on the ocean floor or huge gouges in the Earth's surface, such as the Grand Canyon? There's more, much more to Noah's flood than just a lot of water. This theory of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity supports the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. But is there any scientific evidence to support this amazing theory? On March 22, 1998, a group of boys playing basketball in Monahans, Texas, narrowly missed being struck by a 3-pound meteorite that crashed to the ground only 40 feet away. The police were called, and in less than 48 hours, NASA scientists cracked the meteorite open in a clean room laboratory and discovered inside salt crystals and liquid water.
The NASA scientists who investigated this meteorite believe it came from an asteroid. But that's highly unlikely, because asteroids do not have enough gravity to sustain liquid water, and they can't acquire salt. High-pressure liquid water, suddenly expelled into the vacuum of space, will explode with enough energy to place comets and asteroids into large orbits around the Sun. The Sun's energy slowly pushed the rocky bodies, asteroids, away from the Sun and into the asteroid belt, which lies between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. It worked just like a radiometer. Sunlight heats the black side of each vein more than the white side. Rare gas molecules bounce off the hotter side more forcefully than off the colder side. Likewise, the fountains of the great deep placed oceans of water vapor into orbit around the Sun. These gas molecules bounced vigorously off the hot sides of these spinning rocky bodies, the sides facing the Sun. Each day-night cycle produced huge temperature changes because asteroids do not have a thick atmosphere. My computer simulations of this event and the radiometer effect showed that the orbits of asteroids slowly spiraled out to the asteroid belt. Even asteroids with highly inclined orbits were gradually herded in to the asteroid belt. This rocky material has been and is still returning to Earth as meteorites. The Italian Space Agency announced in May of 2001 that they had found, using great care to avoid contamination, 78 different types of living bacteria inside meteorites. Those dormant bacteria could not have originated in outer space. What would they eat? They are simply returning home.
Scientists are also scratching their heads over another recent discovery.
We can see on our planet 17 very strange features which can now be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This explanation shows us just how rapidly major mountains formed. It explains the coal and oil deposits, the rapid continental drift, why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches and hundreds of canyons and volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossils, the frozen mammoths, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. The pre-flood Earth probably had only one very large supercontinent covered with lush vegetation. There were seas and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, but perhaps 9,000 feet high. According to the hydroplate theory, the pre-flood Earth had a lot of subterranean water, about half of what is now in our oceans. This water was contained in interconnected chambers, forming a thin spherical shell about half a mile thick, perhaps 10 miles below the Earth's surface. Increasing pressure in the subterranean water stretched the crust just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack which grew in both directions at about 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. All along this globe-encircling rupture, fountains of water jetted supersonically almost 20 miles into the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rains, such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day. And it describes these events about 5,000 years ago, which we can now tie together scientifically. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals, producing some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska. The high-pressure fountains also eroded rock on both sides of the crack, even launching many into space.
The Apollo 13 astronauts made an important discovery as they were traveling to the moon. They threw waste matter overboard. Surprisingly, it orbited the spacecraft all the way to the moon. Why?
Here on Earth, you would not feel the spacecraft's gravity, because Earth's gravity is so much larger. But when far from Earth, the spacecraft's gravity dominates things near it. Some rocks launched into space were as big as a city block. Their gravity pulled in smaller rocks, water vapor, and muddy water, which in outer space quickly froze. The gas and gravity caused the orbiting swarms to shrink. If those swarms were primarily ice, they became comets. Comets are simply dirty, fluffy snowballs. If the swarms were primarily rocks, they became asteroids. Asteroids are flying rock piles. And meteoroids, meteors, and meteorites are individual rocks. Most eroded rocks were like sand grains and stayed on Earth. They settled through the waters as sediments, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. This erosion widened the rupture. Eventually, the width was so great that the compressed rock beneath the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, compressed and buckled. The portions of the hydroplate that buckled downward formed ocean trenches. Those that buckled upward formed mountains. This is why the major mountain chains are parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. On the continents, each bowl-shaped depression or basin was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes.
This illustration of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity does support the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. But if major government agencies have developed these theories, what else might they know? Is there evidence of any government's involvement in the search for Noah's Ark? Satellites have mapped the globe with cameras of unbelievable clarity and resolution. Can Mount Ararat have escaped these lenses? And what of the rest of the Noah's Ark story? A book long removed from the biblical canon tells us the body of Adam was taken aboard the ark. Has it been found? Surprisingly, the world's governments have, by and large, taken a somewhat benign view of the search for Noah's Ark. In spite of dozens of expeditions over the past 200 years, there have been few official efforts to find what many believe to be the cradle of mankind. In 1916, however, an event occurred that resulted in a full-fledged government expedition to Mount Ararat. Shortly after World War I, a Russian pilot, Lieutenant Rybolsky, told his remarkable story of sighting the Ark.
I was stationed with a small group of aviators about 25 miles northeast of Mount Ararat. A new high-altitude engine had been installed in one of the planes, and I was sent up for test flight. When I circled the mountain, I spotted a dark structure there, huge, something the size of a battleship. It was a strange-looking craft, but quite clearly a boat with a rounded-over top.
News of Lieutenant Rybolsky's sighting reached Tsar Nicholas himself. In 1917, the Tsar dispatched 2 companies of soldiers to locate and document this extraordinary find. The soldiers found and measured the Ark. They also made a photographic record of the great ship. But unfortunately, all of this was taking place just as the Communist Revolution was breaking out at home. As a result, reports and photos of this expedition have yet to be found. They are presumed lost or hidden in some secret Kremlin vault. They were, however, seen.
There's been controversy about whether or not there ever was a Russian expedition or an Ark sighting around the time of 1916 or 1917. Our author spent 20 years researching Anastasia, the last surviving member of the Russian royal family. During one of his personal conversations with her, he was shocked when she started to talk about an expedition which her father, the Tsar, had commissioned to go to Mount Ararat and measure and photograph Noah's Ark. She told him she'd actually seen the photographs and the report from the expedition. She also told him she'd worn a cross made from the wood of Noah's Ark.
If in fact those records and photographs still exist, their discovery would perhaps answer many of the questions still remaining about the Ark. But can they be found? American pilots stationed near Mount Ararat during World War II apparently sighted the Ark as well, but the U.S. government's response was quite different.
In 1948, I saw a 35mm film of Noah's Ark taken by military aircraft fly over of Mount Ararat. On the film, I saw a long cigar-shaped vessel which was dark in contrast to the surrounding ice lake.
The official response of both military and civilian leaders in the U.S. has been to simply ignore these reports, as well as more recent reports of satellite imagery. Repeated requests through the Freedom of Information Act have so far proven fruitless. Why? Could it be that they already know what's there?
And there at the Strategic Air Command are secret documents right now which have pictures of Noah's Ark. They're even labeled Noah's Ark on the picture.
In the mid-1990s, I worked on a top-secret government contract. During that time, I spoke with a man who used government assets and imaging equipment to search for Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat in 1974. The mission was probably instigated by the CIA director who had recently spoken with an Ark researcher.
We know our government has photos and satellite imagery of that area of Noah's Ark. However, they probably won't want to release that because when they do, they'll also disclose just how good our spy technology has become.
That might be one reason to withhold the photographs and images, but could there be another reason? Could it be that there's more than just the Ark itself to be concerned about? A former employee of the Smithsonian thinks there is. However, we should point out that both the Smithsonian and the National Geographic deny the story that follows.
Well, I was working at the Smithsonian Institute in the vertebrate paleontology section, and I saw my immediate supervisor with a visiting scientist, and they were both bent over a viewer looking at some photographs. Just told me, "Well, take a look." And what I saw was an oblong object resembling a ship, which wasn't under the ice but semi-covered with it. It was broken in the middle, or it appeared to me to be broken, and one end was definitely smashed. He told me that this had been taken on a mountain named Ararat in Turkey. There were some boxes and crates on the loading dock, and he mentioned to me, okay, that these were from Ararat, and these were going into his section, which was physical anthropology. One of these was a oblong sarcophagus-like thing that I was told later was made out of alabaster.
The idea that Noah would put Adam's body aboard the ark seems quite odd. But in the Apocrypha book of Eden, now Apocrypha books are those books that did not get in the Bible because they were not considered divinely inspired, it says that Noah was instructed by Adam's son Jared to take Adam's body aboard the ark. In another verse, it clearly implies that Noah is to leave Adam's body on the ark, and a third verse clearly states that gold, myrrh, and incense is to be left with Adam's body as an offering to God. There is definitely strong evidence that Adam's body was taken aboard Noah's Ark, and equally strong evidence from eyewitnesses in Turkey that the Smithsonian Institution and National Geographic Society conducted an expedition in the 1960s which photographed that body and or recovered it for further analysis in Washington, D.C.
Again, we want to make it clear that both the Smithsonian and the National Geographic deny ever conducting such an expedition or funding expeditions for others. One thing is certain, the alabaster coffin is nowhere to be seen at the Smithsonian. But there is an interesting sidelight to this story. Could it be that the Smithsonian and the government have more information about Noah's Ark than they are willing to share? Recent requests for satellite imagery of Mount Ararat, or aerial imagery of Mount Ararat, or records of the Mount Ararat Anomaly Project have all been denied. Requests for non-photographic documentation is under review. In the meantime, there are living eyewitnesses who are willing to share their experiences.
He said he had a great uncle that knew where the Ark was, and his great uncle was going to take us up to it. So I was kind of exciting, you know. Boy, I'm on an adventure. Mustafa's great uncle. He just took us right up the side of this mountain, and we were going around rocks and above cliffs and below cliffs. It was like a trail. You know, he was like a guide. He knew exactly where he was going. And I'm tired and I'm winded, and it's, oh boy, when is this ever going to end? When are we going to see the Ark? If we don't see it pretty soon, I want to go back. His uncle turns around and laughs at me, and he points down. And then all of a sudden you look down, and here's this huge, awesome ship sitting below you in this fog. You know, it's almost like a, you know, you picture a dream, and there it is.
Ed Davis befriended a young man while stationed in Turkey during World War II. In return, the young man agreed to show him Noah's Ark.
At that particular time, you couldn't see the Ark. When you got where you could see it, he would come back and get me. I thought, well, that... But a couple of months later, he come back. He said, we can see it, let's go. We were all tied together, about 20 feet apart with a big rope. I was never as cold, as wet, as hungry, as sleepy in my life as I was when I got up there. They was trying to show me the Ark. When I was standing, it looked like a big piece of blue rock. And then we moved back, and then we could see in the end of it. It was awesome. You knew somebody was watching you, there was something going on. I don't know how to explain that feeling, but you knew someone or something. Well, it was just a mighty power someplace there present.
Dr. Ahmet Ali Arslan is a Washington correspondent for a major Turkish newspaper, but he knows Mount Ararat like few men do.
I grew up there, and I climbed more than 50 times to the summit of Mount Ararat. In 1989, and I climbed the northern part of Mount Ararat and upper side of Ahura Gorge. I went to check a certain area which had been shown in a satellite photo as a possible location of Noah's Ark. I noticed 100 or 200 feet away there was building type of structure, definitely made of wood. It almost looked like a captain's cabin. It shouldn't be there. My belief is that what I saw and what I took in my photographs definitely, without question, is Noah's Ark.
Those who believe that the Bible is a book of historical truth will more easily accept the possibility of the ark being on Mount Ararat. Those who believe that the Bible is a book of fiction perhaps will remain skeptical even in the face of the most conclusive proof. But there is another group, those who have said they have been there and seen the great ship.
It was awesome.
What I saw is Noah's Ark.
Of course, our mystery would be solved if the Defense Department and NASA would simply release the satellite imagery and surveillance photographs that have been taken over the past 50 years, but that doesn't seem likely. In the meantime, the search goes on. Many highly respected Ark explorers are expected to mount expeditions if and when the Turkish government reopens the mountain to research and climbing. And if you have a flair for adventure, a group calling themselves the Noah's Ark Alliance has posted a $1 million reward for the discovery of Noah's Ark and confirmation of its present existence. A number of explorers, scientists, and just plain ordinary men claim to have already encountered the great ship that saved mankind. But there are still many aspects of the story that remain unexplained, like if there is an alabaster coffin in the Smithsonian, who is in it?